Okay, cool. Oh, yes, there you go. Well, this meeting has been recorded. And that's really for the purposes of us to share it with those who haven't been able to attend today for whatever reason, but have registered. And also for you to reflect back on in future if you wanted to revisit or share it with colleagues as well. So if you would prefer to have your camera off because we are recording, you're more than welcome to do that. But of course, when we're presenting, it doesn't matter so much because you'll just be looking at the screen. But when we have our panel discussion, it's always nice to see friendly faces at the other end, so we don't feel like we're presenting to no one. But yeah, welcome everybody. Still more people filing in. Okay. Hi everybody, welcome. Still more. Oh my goodness, it is really a process, isn't it, letting everyone come in. Welcome to those new people who are just joining us. We're about to get started. So as I mentioned, please feel free to introduce yourself to others via the chat function today. It's always nice to know who else is in the room. But good to see so many familiar faces. Okay. Well, I think what we might do, even though we've still got people filing in, is we might get started. So okay, so I'm just going to share my screen with you all, which you should be able to see there. Okay, so officially, welcome everybody. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this session today for the purposes of sharing with those who've registered or unable to attend, because we've had a fair bit of interest in this particular topic, which is fabulous. So, as I said, if you feel more comfortable with your camera off, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, we always like to see your smiling faces. We do have a fantastic range of partners in the room, and a special warm welcome to those new people today who may not have previously connected with WHISE through the partnership groups, but have an interest in this topic. So I think we have a few people joining from country Victoria, and there's even an overseas person, believe it or not. So welcome to you. So we're extending a warm welcome to you all on this wintry Melbourne Tuesday morning. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge that today I'm coming to you from the unceded Aboriginal land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge that many of you are joining from different lands around Melbourne today, as shown in the chat. We recognise the strong connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to land, water and cultures, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and those who are joining us today in the Zoom room. Welcome. Noting that Australia was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Hey, Kat.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Not that it matters, but we can see the notes. So I don't know if you want to try resharing or if you want me to have a go.
No, I've obviously just shared the wrong screen.
Oh, good.
Give me 2 ticks. Thank you, Zoe, for letting me know.
No worries.
Okay. See, it's always fun, isn't it, when you're doing these presentations?
I thought it was a auto-generated transcript, and then I realised it was ahead of you. How's it doing that?
There you go.
You're very organised to have such good notes.
Thanks, Anna. I know that voice. I don't even have to look who's talking.
It's not Anna.
No.
Oh, who was it? Virginia?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, you and Anna sound exactly the same. Okay. Sorry, it's so small, and I've obviously just picked the wrong one here. Let's see if this one works. Audience window. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Lovely. Apologies. It's quite small when you share your screen and it's hard to read whether it says audience. So apologise for my peering into the screen just before. So what I'd like to do is, I guess, welcome each and every one of you today. A special thank you to our guest presenters. So we have Avega Bishop from Margins to the Mainstream, and Michelle Rowland and Fatima from SECL, or Southeast Community Links, along with our panel members, Kelly and Catherine. So Kelly's from WHISE and Catherine is from Family Safety Victoria. So today I'm also joined by my WHISE colleague, Zoe, Acting Health Promotion Manager, who will kind of co-present and chime in as we go along and also help facilitate. And we also have from WHISE here today, Trishula, Love Preet, Kelly, and from the HP team, and also Dos, who is our wonderful comms and marketing guru. So in terms of housekeeping, just keep, as you know, I don't even really need to say this because everyone's doing it anyway, but mic's on silent. As you know, we love emojis at WHISE, so please use those. There's one there on the screen. To, you know, show your appreciation, clapping, love hearts, etc. And if you'd like to ask a question, we ask that you put it in the chat. We will address these in the Q&A section in the panel at the end, and we'll moderate the chat through the event as well. So just to run you through the plan today, we will present up front an overview of the underpinning of intersectional policy and theory through to how to apply an intersectional gendered lens and the resources available to guide this work. And as I said, we have 2 fantastic guest presenters who will join us with their case studies and an opportunity at the end of this for a panel discussion. And finally, as it says there, we really request your commitment to participate in a sort of 3 to 4 minute post-event evaluation survey, and we hope to be able to provide time for this at the end of the session. But if not, we would ask that you commit to completing that survey, because that's really important in terms of managing and reviewing and evaluating our work. So your questions. As we asked in the pre-evaluation, we asked if there was anything in particular you would like to learn about applying an intersectional gender lens to violence prevention. And these are some of the questions that came up. So it's clear, and what we heard from the last forum, that having practical tools to support the work along with seeing what others have done is really useful to help understand and how to bring that intersectional approach or that gender lens to your work. And like the last forum, today is a continuing conversation around an intersectional gender lens practice, and we're all learning together through this process. It is important as practitioners that we draw on the tools and evidence available along with building regular reflective practice, which is something we will definitely talk about more. And that obviously takes time and effort to do. Through our continued attendance at learning forums like this one, it helps us to network, share our practice, resources and examples as we all learn together on this journey. So this slide here, lots of text on it. So apologies, but I just wanted to bring your attention to the middle section. So this is our PRET, or our Promoting Respect and Equity Together theory of change. And you can see here our immediate and longer term goals around the strategy are around partners having a strengthened capacity to apply an intersectional gender lens. So this is just linking it back to our strategy and showing how it fits in with the work that we do. This slide is really highlighting the learning objectives today and also what we'll measure through our post-evaluation survey. We understand that there is a diversity of attendees in the room today, so we've kind of got varied knowledge in terms of where people are at in intersectional gender lens planning, which is always a challenge to manage. But we hope that you will come away from today's learning forum and discussion feeling empowered and a little more knowledgeable and confident to apply an intersectional gender lens to your prevention of gendered violence practice. So those of you who came to the last forum, which we ran in May, would find this slide familiar. And really what this is talking about is the framing of, I guess, intersectionality. And you can see here that we've got the systems and structures, and then, as we often refer to, vulnerable or minority populations sitting in groups along the bottom there. However, this type of structure turns a blind eye really to some of those larger systems and structures at play that perpetuate inequity towards the vulnerable or minority populations. And I don't really like using that as terminology because it is quite victim blaming in the way that it comes across. But rather than referring to these groups as marginalized, we need to look at those inequitable systems and structures. So this is really what I'm talking about. So when we direct interventions to the vulnerable or the minority populations and kind of highlight and pick them out, effectively we are, and ignore the systems and structures and they're left unchanged, then we just continue to kind of discriminate and oppress people in those populations. And as you can see down the bottom there, the various different ways of describing what that looks like: ageism, sexism, ableism, colonialism, racism, etc. So it's really important that in our work, and increasingly, we continue to put a spotlight on the systems and structures of our work. And this slide is pretty visual. There's a lot going on there in terms of pictures, but effectively what we're talking about is rather than looking at the individual and the person as being the issue, it's about looking at fixing the system. So that book, Laura Bates, Fix the System, Not the Women, I haven't actually read that one, but that's definitely on my increasingly big reading list that I have next to my bedside table. And you will see that some of the other pictures indicate that the importance of having lived experience and people who can represent the groups are incredibly important in doing this work. You'll see there's also a couple of pictures on the left of the screen, the woman in the wheelchair wearing the black evening dress and the coat. These were pictures that were actually taken from Australian Fashion Week in 2022, so just earlier this year. And a collective of designers basically created some functional, fashionable garments that were accessible in form and function for women and men with physical disabilities. So again, that's really fabulous to see that we've got diversity on the fashion runway. It's a bit of a segue or a side to the work that we do, but it really highlights the need for visibility and voices of diverse community and people with disabilities to be involved in decisions. And as it says there, nothing about me without me. So when we start to flip this upside down and we position the voices of these populations that are marginalised by the systems and ask them to help contribute to the work, that we can start to change those systems and structures to be more effective. And this message was really loud and clear. Both Zoe and I attended a MCWH, Multicultural Centre for Women's Health Community of Practice, and there were many present who were speaking there around some of the underfunding and cultural inappropriateness of decision services and programs for COLD communities. So it's incredibly important to centre that lived experience at the heart of what we do and why we're all here today talking about intersectionality. So I'm going to throw it out there first, and there's an opportunity here for you to have a go. Would anyone like to have a go at, in terms of just briefly describing what intersectionality is? Feel free to put it in the chat, or you can pop your hand up and take yourself off mute. Everyone loves it when I do this.
I'll put my hand up.
Well, go on, Fiona. Good on you.
I've done my 7 seconds of silence to give other people a chance, because I like to talk. So intersectionality, the way I try and explain that to people in layman's terms, I guess, is we're all, we're all part of a system, and we have different things that make us who we are. And so as a woman, we may have a disability, we may be Aboriginal, and it's those intersecting notions that we're not just a woman. We have these other things that happen in our life that that also that we're subject to in society. And that's kind of just a really easy way that people understand intersectionality. I know it's more complex than that, but that's how I say it too.
Yeah, great.
Layman's terms.
Appreciate your contribution. Virginia, I can see you've got your hand up.
Just echoing what Fiona said, I found a quote from Andre Lorde that says there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. That's something that I hold on to a lot.
Yes, and you might see that one appearing later in the presentation. So thanks very much, Virginia. So I guess in terms of, as Fiona and Virginia have outlined, intersectionality really describes how those systems and structures interact on multiple levels to oppress, create barriers and overlapping forms of discrimination and stigma, and also power imbalances based on characteristics such as Aboriginality, gender, sex, sexual orientation, identity, gender identity, ethnicity, colour, nationality, refugee or asylum seeker background, migration or visa status, language, religion. The list goes on. So these compound the risk of people experiencing family violence and can create additional barriers for a person to access the help that they may need. Intersectionality as a concept has been around for quite some time. It's grown out of an important history of Black feminist theory and activism in the United States, which began back in the 60s and 70s, and recognised that the feminist movement as a whole did not represent the experiences of Black women. So Black feminists challenged the idea that gender was the primary factor determining a woman's fate. But intersectionality is really an approach, a mindset, not just a mere toolkit. It's a way of, as I said before, thinking, reflecting, and working, and it takes time and practice. And that transformative change starts or begins where the individual and the system meet. And intersectionality is addressed through a process that focuses on that kind of self-reflection, the relationships and the context. And the effectiveness of this approach depends on the willingness of users or organisations to challenge themselves and interrogate their own attitudes and ways of working. It's not something that can be achieved via checklists or prescriptive processes, as you'll see as we go on. So just to bring back where this work is grounded, it's grounded in lots of national and state policy and evidence. You'll see here, this is the Everybody Matters document, which is the inclusion and equity statement developed by the Victorian Government and Family Safety Victoria. It was born out of the Royal Commission into Family Violence and speaks of intersectionality as an analytical framework, which means looking beyond the person's individual identities and focusing on the points of intersection that are created. So in the case of family violence, this is the way that it may be experienced by individuals, and instances may increase their barriers to be involved in prevention interventions, disclose violence, or access quality and appropriate services. As shown by the diagram on the screen, there are the social identity, this is the one on the left, there are the social identities and systems of oppression that sit in the middle, surrounded by the context that exists and supports the suppression. And the outer ring identifies the many intersecting identities that converge. So it is very, very complex. Within this framework is outlined on the bottom right, that document, that visual. It acknowledges that there are 5 supporting frameworks in doing this work or understanding this work that speak to human rights, a strengths-based approach, definitely a trauma-informed practice that has cultural safety and is person-centered, and that really helps to underpin the intersectionality work and allow it to be carried out safely. A pilot of the practitioner intersectional framework resources has been conducted by Family Safety Victoria, and these are now undergoing review before release to the sector, so they haven't yet been released. But Catherine Kosassi, the Manager for Equity and Inclusion from SFV, will join us on the panel a bit later today and will be available to provide a further update around when these might be released. Again, grounding this work, it's important to briefly reflect on policy evidence and documents that underpin our work in the primary prevention. So the second edition of Change the Story, as we would all be familiar with, those of us who are primary practitioners in violence prevention will know that this was launched in 2021 and superseded the first edition published in 2015. It has been incorporated to updated to incorporate the latest evidence and knowledge about the drivers, but also revisions that are shown on the screen here around clarifying, expanding and improving the frameworks and specific topics, including intersectionality. So those are the 2 areas where Change the Story has really allowed for intersectionality to be more or play more of a part in primary prevention practice. As it says there, the bottom one there is an expanded focus on the change needed at a structural and systemic levels, what this change entails, and the key roles that governments need to play to drive change through laws, policies, and regulation. And obviously the GE Act is one of those, which is really fabulous and starting to help to push this taking this intersectional gender lens to our work. That diagram on the right there is again just looking at the intersecting forms of oppression and comes from Change the Story. So you'll note I've put references on all of these slides, and we can provide the slide deck to those who may be interested with references later. In case you missed it, this is a document called Changing the Landscape, which was launched in early 2022. It's a national resource to prevent violence against women and girls with disabilities. And it complements and extends on Change the Story, which I just spoke about. This resource is really relevant to anyone involved in policy development, program funding, design, planning or implementation, and those working on the ground in numerous fields, including disability specific and violence specific roles. And I think apart from the fact that it's got a really beautiful cover and colour scheme to the document, this picture on the left here really shows how in the case of disability, there are intersecting drivers around gender inequality, which are those gendered drivers of violence on the left, but also ableist drivers and how they converge to again create further discrimination for women with disabilities. And then of course, some women and girls have other intersecting drivers of violence as well that contribute. So would encourage everyone to access this particular resource and make good use of it. Again, this is Pride and Prevention. I won't dwell on that one. Changing the Picture, another national resource produced by Our Watch to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. And the DELCJA Safe Our Way is the Victorian agreement that commits signatories to work together and be accountable for assuring that Aboriginal people, families and communities live free from family violence. WHISE actually sits on that DELCJA Southern Regional Action Group and attends those meetings. So that's really important for our organisation to be involved in that and support primary prevention initiatives through this community. Again, here we've got Free from Violence, which is the second action plan and has a commitment to this work as well, drawing on the lived experience of people and contributing to it. So what does it mean to apply an intersectional gendered lens to the work? And this is what you are here for today. We're sorry to say, but I guess there's no silver bullet, quick fix, tick box, checklist to do this work. It requires the commitment to engage in reflective practice, time and consideration. I guess to be philosophical for a moment, intersectionality is an approach. It's a mindset, not a mere toolkit. And as I said, it's a way of thinking, reflecting and working. Transformative change begins where the individual and the system meet. And the effectiveness of intersectional approaches depend on how willing the user is to challenge themselves, interrogate their own attitudes and ways of working. So what we are hoping is with some practical tips and guidance to embark on this work, we're looking to also showcase examples of this work in practice, which helps really bring it to life as well. So what we've got here are just some points on intersectional practice, which have been taken from a fabulous guide by our partners, Multicultural Centre for Women's Health. They have a document called Intersectionality Matters, and these are some key points around what intersectional practice is. So it's going beyond explanations or solutions that use single categories to describe people or issues, and acknowledge that we are all shaped by many factors interacting together. So as Virginia said, and Audre Lorde said, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And that is so true. So Audre Lorde once described herself as a Black lesbian feminist mother lover poet. She was born to parents from the West Indies and grew up in New York City. She wrote and occasionally published poetry and was active in the 60s movements for civil rights, feminism, against the protests against the Vietnam War. She was a critic of what she saw as feminism's blindness to racial differences and fear of lesbians being involved. So again, this was back in the 60s and 70s. So although intersectionality is something that is coming into practice more frequently now, it was certainly around and raised by these women some time ago. The next one is around identifying and transforming the systems and structures of power and privilege that negatively shape individual outcomes. building coalitions and working towards social equity. And that's where we're talking about fixing the system, not the person. Actively pausing to reflect and address our own relationships to power and privilege. And this is something that can be quite confronting. There has to obviously be a readiness to embark on intersectional practice in this type of work, because it does, to do it really well, it does take that time to kind of step back and reflect. Because when your mind is full of assumptions, conclusions, and beliefs, it has no penetration. It just repeats past impressions. And I think that quote is just so relevant in terms of this work. So it's about really taking the time to pause and to be able to push back before we start embarking on this work, to allow that time and space to really think about what this looks like. And I'll talk more to that in a minute. And of course, centering marginalised experiences through voices and leadership wherever possible. This quote from Vikos shows finding the right way to approach social problems involves partnering with the people who face them head on. This is because their perspectives and living realities will largely determine whether an initiative will actually be effective in context and how far it will go to meeting their needs, which is an incredibly powerful quote as well. In terms of available resources that are out there, there's some fabulous resources that are available. These ones included. So you'll see there, Women's Health Victoria have a gender transformative change guide for practitioners. Highly recommend having a look at that one. It's got some really practical tips as well. The Intersectionality Matters guide, which I referred to in the presentation here by Multicultural Centre for Women's Health, is also available. Everybody Matters. And of course, the Free From Violence strategy has some context and information in there as well. The next one is actually, as I said, there's no kind of magic bullet, but this particular resource is one that we've found and feel is particularly useful in terms of starting to do this work in intersectionality. So through it basically has it's produced by the UN Women, and it's a resource guide and toolkit which is comprised of 8 enablers and a framework for action that really helps the user to reflect and identify actions that can be taken to address intersectionality. So the first one there is reflexivity. So it's about examining your own unconscious biases, beliefs, judgments, and practices, as well as those of your organisation, and how these may influence how you work and engage with others. The second one, dignity, choice, and autonomy. Respect and uphold the dignity, choice, and autonomy of all people. This cannot be assumed on behalf of others, and decision-making cannot be substituted. It's about thinking who has independence and who doesn't, who shares their perspectives and who doesn't. Number 3 is around accessibility and universal design. So it's taking a universal design approach, ensuring accessibility and reasonable accommodation. Have you asked people what they need to participate? Have you removed physical, transportation, information, and communication barriers, or provided reasonable alternatives? Have you addressed altitudinal, environmental, and institutional barriers? Number 4, diverse knowledges. It's about prioritising and learning from people with diverse forms of knowledge who are typically excluded from expert roles. There is a relationship between power and knowledge, production and design. Number 5, intersecting identities. So it's considering how diverse identities interact to create unique social effects that vary according to time and place. Number 6, relational power. It's a be aware of and challenge relational power, including our own. People may experience power in one context or time. Number 7, this is a big one. recognizing the influence of time and space. Nothing is static, and privilege and disadvantage are fluid and influenced by our social positioning and location. And number 8, promote human rights and address inequalities by transforming social structures and changing the way resources and relationships are produced and allocated. So these 8 principles are outlined in the document, and then following that there is a framework for action. It's all very clearly laid out, and we would recommend that you have a look at this particular guide or resource kit in doing this work in future. So what I would like to do now is, without further ado, I would like to introduce Avega Bishop. So Avega is the project coordinator for the Margins to the Mainstream project, which is a project that Women's Health East is leading, along with women who have disabilities as their expert panel. And this exciting project elevates the voices of women with disabilities and promotes the leadership of them, as well as building capacity of the Together for Equality and Respect partners. So that's their primary prevention partnership and their approaches to the prevention of violence against women. It's led by Women's Health East in partnership with Women with Disabilities Victoria and 6 organisations within the TIFA partnership. Avega herself has been working at Women's Health East since July 2020 as the coordinator for this project. She has experience in promoting women's rights and gender equality, particularly in the international development work. She's worked in varied roles as a consultant and as a program manager, gender equality advisor for a variety of organisations. This has included both organisational work such as gender, self-assessments and audits, and in the design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of programs and projects. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and I will hand over to Zoe, who's going to share screen for Avega's presentation. Welcome, Avega.
Thanks so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I loved so much in there. But thank you very much for having me today. It's a wonderful opportunity to share with you about the Margins to the Mainstream project, or M2M for short. But first I'd like to start by acknowledgement of country. There's a slide on the next PowerPoint. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, the traditional owners of the land on which Women's Health East works. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We affirm that sovereignty was never ceded and that colonialism and racism continue to impact on the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. We express our hope for reconciliation. And next slide, please, Zoe. I'd also like to acknowledge lived experience, particularly the lived experience of women with disabilities, neurodiversity, mental health and chronic health conditions, their strength, resilience and expertise. And I'd like to acknowledge the lived experience of everyone in this room. Just by way of introduction, that illustration that was on the previous slide is one of the illustrations that was developed through the Margins to the Mainstream project. Really this idea of looking at expertise, lived experience expertise, as such a source of wealth for us to learn from. And I've been lucky to learn particularly from the women with disabilities who are part of the expert group in the project since I came on board. But just a little bit of background. I won't go too much into this because it's an honour to be here with people from the regional partnership in another part of Melbourne. but the Together for Equality and Respect Partnership, or TIFA, is the Eastern Metro Region's collaborative cross-sector partnership, which supports collective action to prevent violence against women. And probably very similar to the partnership that Women's Health East and Women in the Southeast and others here today are part of. The Eastern Metro Region Partnership includes 7 local councils, community health services, and a range of specialist services and organisations. And really the importance of the partnership is really central to the Margins to the Mainstream project, because the project was developed in response to the TIFA partnership identifying that was a gap and an opportunity to strengthen intersectional primary prevention practice. There was a call for proposals from the Australian Department of Social Security, and through a consultation process, a number of organisations in the partnership came together to put in a consortium bid for funding. And fortunately, this project was one of only 13 selected nationwide. So it was a really important grounding in the partnership, and the project is a partnership project. And just to say very briefly, why is it important to address violence against women with disabilities? You know, women with disabilities experience disproportionate rates of violence compared to women without disabilities. 65% of women with disabilities experience violence during their lifetime. And women with disabilities are twice as likely than women without disabilities to experience sexual violence and intimate partner violence. And we know that women with disabilities experience both gender-based violence and disability-based violence. Violence is perpetrated in more settings, public, private, and institutional. It tends to be more frequent and over longer periods of time. So there's a little bit of the impetus for why the TIFA partnership identified this as something that was important to put on the agenda for their collective work. On the next slide, you can see the 5 project objectives. And I'm really glad that we've had the introduction that Katrina provided, because we've already talked about some of those isms that are very important to acknowledge. But ableism, briefly, is a system of beliefs, processes and practices that privilege people without disabilities and disadvantage and exclude people with disability. And the project was designed really with elevating the voices of women with disability and promoting their leadership and status in society as the central objective of the project. But around that is the importance of strengthening our partnership in TIFA and the capacity of partner organisations to embed into prevention work a focus on sexism and ableism as the intersecting structural drivers of violence against women with disabilities. So without going into detail about the other project objectives, on the next slide is a bit of a diagram. I'm not really a fan of mechanistic diagrams, but this gives a little bit of a picture of the key parts of the project, if we can say that, which need to work together. So the project experts group is, as I said, central to the project. And we also have a project advisory group, which, as Katrina mentioned, has a number of representatives from TIFA organisations, as well as Women's Health East and Women with Disabilities Victoria, who are Women's Health East partners in this project. We also currently have 2 councils. We have the Eastern Domestic Violence Service, and we have a community rep from Women with Disability, a woman with disabilities, and an evaluation consultant who's undertaking our project evaluation. And there in the other cog, we have the TIFA partnership. So we've got a couple of strategies and mechanisms to engage with the broader TIFA partnership. So this has been including specific training or community of practice sessions. In the last year, we had 2 small grants that were awarded to TIFA partner organisations to take further their work on preventing violence against women with disability and doing meaningful consultations. And we also have social marketing and awareness raising, particularly around the 16 days. So on the next slide, we have the reality of life for the last couple of years for most of us in our working lives. We're meeting on Zoom. And for the project expert group in Margins to the Mainstream, this has also been our reality. The project experts group was recruited in the later part of 2020. We put in place a very simple call out for expressions of interest for women who had lived experience of disability, neurodiversity, mental health or chronic health conditions who lived in the EMR, and asked if they were interested in doing some skills development training around gender equality and the prevention of violence against women. And through that process, we recruited 10 women who were keen to be part of that. And we started with some skills development sessions, which over time moved into more co-design activities. So I think when you look at some of the literature about co-design, it sort of seems to be broken down into very specific steps, but certainly my experience as the project coordinator was that, you know, there was really a lot of importance in getting feedback from the women in the group, reflecting on what was going well, keeping in touch with each participant to see what their feedback was, and thinking about, you know, what next. So pretty much a learning by doing approach rather than following a checklist or a linear sort of plan. And I'd just like to say, I think the 5 supporting frameworks that were shown on the slide earlier really summarise in a great way some of the things that were important in working with the project experts group. So particularly that human rights-based approach, a strength-based approach, trauma-informed practice, safety, and taking a person-centred approach. I think it was really important to have time to build relationships and for people to feel comfortable together, even if it was in a Zoom room. It was a very important point of connection when we were all living through various stages of lockdowns in Melbourne. So without spending a lot of time talking about the experts group, I just wanted to give you a perspective from one of the experts who presented this information at a community of practice session that was held in May this year. And in response to the question, what stands out to you about being in the M2M experts group with other women with lived experience of disabilities, she said, 2 things really stand out to me. The first thing is the belonging and support of the rest of the group. I find that the world I live in requires a lot of hiding and dishonesty, which I find is really difficult for me to cope with. The experts group is a place where we can be real and genuine with each other. Everyone in the group supports each other and I feel very accepted. The group is always there to listen to me and value to me. The support of the group has helped me to develop the courage to face difficult memories. Everyone's courage in sharing of themselves has inspired me to also develop my courage. I find the feedback and support of the group helped me to shape ideas in a way that felt safe and productive for the public. We had a lot of overlap in what we experienced and wanted to share. The work of the group together achieved so much more than would have been possible working alone. She also said the second thing that really stands out to me is the chance to use difficult lived experiences to make the community better. I find that it is easy to feel broken by my experiences and to become weary about ableism and abuse that exists in the world. Using my lived experience in a productive way helps me to feel strong and capable of being part of positive change. It creates a sense of hope that my experiences can be used to help support other people. So that's just a little bit of an insight into the reflections that the experts have shared, and they're very powerful reflections which have been so important in understanding, how entrenched ableism is in our society, and how, as practitioners and staff of organisations that are working to promote rights and prevent violence against women, we really need to centre the experience of women with lived experience of disability. I just wanted to share with you very quickly a couple of the messages that the women developed. These messages were used as part of the 16 Days of Activism campaign available to TIFA partners last year, and have since been featured in some videos that some of the experts have appeared in through Margins to the Mainstream. So this is a really simple message. Women with lived experience of disability say equality is the right to make my own choices and decisions. And this combination of gender and disability stereotypes means women with disabilities are being seen as unable to make decisions for themselves, needing to be protected as they are vulnerable. And this applies across relationships in their families, but also with service providers and in their engagements with government and other organisations and the wider community. So really, really important message for us all to take to heart. And just on the next slide is another message that was developed by the experts group. Women with lived experience of disability say equality is when gender and disability stereotypes do not limit who I can be or what I can do. And the images there, yes, also the right to make mistakes and take risks, Virginia, that's another thing that they have said very strongly. So the images on the that we have developed that go with the messages were developed in association with an organisation in South Australia that have women with disabilities as graphic artists and designers. So there's a real sense of the importance of developing that representation that shows women with disabilities in a positive and non-stereotypical way. I think you can see that through the drawings on this slide. And I've got another one to share with you very quickly on the next PowerPoint slide. Women with lived experience of disability say, equality is asking me to dance, not just inviting me to the party. So really thinking about, what is tokenism and what does true inclusion mean? So I think this is a wonderful message. It has so many layers to it. But moving on, because I know I've already been talking for quite a lot of time, and Kat may very well give me a wind up signal at any time. Just moving to the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about these popular terms, consultation and co-design. They're often used very frequently these days, and often a little bit too flexibly, I think. So I wanted to share with you a couple of diagrams that I find very helpful conceptually. The next slide, I'm sure many of you have seen various ladders of participation, but I rather like this one. This is a fairly traditional one, and I think it applies quite well to experiences many of us might have had going into a working group or going into some sort of committee structure, but also thinking about how it can be applied to individual women with disabilities, for example, who are asked to join advisory committees, for example. They might be invited to join, but there's a lot of steps to get to being able to influence decisions or make decisions at the top of the staircase there. So just sort of applying that to some of the ways in which we bring, you know, one or two people with lived experience into structures that are not set out necessarily to be very responsive or understanding of the different sort of expertise that lived experience brings. But on the next slide, I've got a more complicated set of diagrams, really, and this is borrowed from the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, or TASCI. And I think these seesaw images really show the whole range in which decision-making power can be shared to greater or lesser extents. You know, so where I think the people on the left are people who are there in their expert roles or the professional capacities or as staff, and people on the right are there as figures who are community representatives or people from minority groups, etc. So I think just making the point that the closer you get to the left-hand side, it fits easier with business as usual. It's more likely to lead to incremental solutions based on existing assumptions. Whereas if you move over to the right-hand side, it requires a bigger shift in practice, and it's more likely to lead to different solutions based on shifted assumptions and ways of working. So I'm just going to quickly go through the next couple of slides, just making the point that the lived experience engagement that we have piloted and practiced through Margins to the Mainstream really is looking at engaging with women as a group and creating that sort of expertise and sharing of expertise in the group, which is very rich. And it's about bringing staff into that space with the experts rather than taking women from their space into, you know, an unfamiliar setting. So just to let you know what's ahead, we're very fortunate that the project has been funded for another year by the Department of Social Security. So we're looking forward to running another 16 days campaign again with our partners in the East. We have 6 short videos to launch, which we're hoping to do during that 16 days period. And we're very happy for organisations outside of the East who would like to use the resources to do so. So please stay in touch. So just going on to the next slide, we can skip over this because we've talked about that lived expertise, and we've already talked about changing the landscape as such an important resource. So I'd really encourage people who haven't had the opportunity to take a dive in there. There are 6 essential actions, and there are also prevention principles, which are really helpful. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. And there is one last slide to share, which again is part of the messages that the experts developed, which really speaks to the importance of us all taking action to address sexism and ableism to protect the human rights of women with disabilities. Thanks very much for your attention. And I'll hand back to you, Kat.
Thank you so much, Avega. What a wonderful presentation. The experiences that you've shared there from the panel of experts are just so powerful and really show how that lived experience approach is just critical in this work. And that's something that obviously can't be rushed either, so it takes time. What I will do is, it's 11 o'clock or just after 11, so we're running a couple of minutes behind schedule, but that's okay, we'll catch that up. I might get you to hold any questions that you have for Avega, or else you can put them directly in the chat, and we're going to take a short break. We'll come back at 11:07, so go make yourself a cup of tea, and we'll be back in the room for the second part in our presentation from Southeast Community Links. Thanks, everyone. Zoe, just checking, you can see the break slide? Great. Yep. Back in a sec. Okay, everyone. Hope we're back with a cup of tea. Have to admit, I do love having my home comforts when I am working, for there are some benefits like the blanket over your legs when you're working from home. Not always possible if you're presenting in person. So when you're back, if you can just maybe pop your camera on or say hello, just so we know that people are back in the room, that would be great. Excellent, nice to see everyone's filing back in. So I would just like to briefly throw to Zoe, as discussed in the presentation thus far. Lived experience is incredibly important in this work, and I'm going to let Zoe have a chat about some of the work that's coming up that WHISE is doing. So Zoe.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, I think it would be a good time to mention, if you haven't seen it already, that on the 18th of October, WHISE is running an event together with Chisholm TAFE and both of our integrated family violence partnerships at Southern Melbourne and the Bayside Peninsula region. We're holding a conference. It's going to be in person, which is very exciting. On Tuesday the 18th, I'll put the link in the chat so that you can have a look at that. Recognising, of course, that the recommendations from the Royal Commission and Everybody Matters very much align to, breaking down those systems and structures that have been basically decided upon by those in dominant groups in society, and that lived experience hasn't been represented historically at all in those systems of power. And this is our intention for us to come together in the region to really reflect on how we can strengthen hugely lived experience in the family violence sector in our region. Thanks, Laura. Thank you. There's also an opportunity to express interest as a person with lived experience of family violence. So unless Laura's got that on hand as well, I will pop that in the chat. So super exciting opportunity for us to come together and really reflect on how in the region we can strengthen the pathways for those with lived experience to enter into the sector, or certainly to be supported to remain in the sector, but also predominantly to be leaders in the sector, so that lived experience is informing those structural decisions and breaking down those power systems that historically haven't offered them that opportunity. So super exciting. You may have heard and seen it already. It's called Aligning the Personal with the Professional. And yeah, I'll drop that expression of interest in there for anybody with lived experience who'd like to be part of the event, bringing their lived experience to it. So that's it from me, and I will pass back to you, Kat.
Thanks, Zoe. So we're at the stage now where we have our second guest presenter, and Michelle is joining us from Southeast Community Links. So the Safer and Stronger Communities pilot program was one of 5 projects that were funded by the Department of Premier and Cabinet in 2018 to 2020 across the different regions of Melbourne that had high levels of resettlement, but also high levels of reporting family violence. So Michelle's going to speak to us about this project today, and we're very honoured to have her here with us. She is the Head of Settlement and Family Violence Prevention at Southeast Community Links and an organisational member of the Southern Melbourne PRET Partnership Group. Michelle is a passionate advocate of human rights, equality and inclusion. She's travelled widely, living and working abroad, and has spent the past 20 years designing and delivering and managing settlement, community development, family violence prevention programs for newly arrived migrant and refugee communities settling in southern Melbourne. So she's recently led the expansion of our settlement, their settlement and family violence prevention work at SECL, and is actively involved in strategic planning within SECL and across local, state and federally funded programs. And I'd also like to welcome, joining Michelle today is Fatima Razahi. She is a valued member of the Afghan Community Co-Design Group involved in the Safer and Stronger Communities project. Please use your emoji clap to welcome Michelle and Fatima to the Zoom room today, and I will stop sharing so you can share your screen.
Wonderful. Thanks, Katrina and the team at WHISE for having myself present, and also Fatima joining us today at this Intersectionality Forum. I think I've got
Michelle,
everything.
you just want to present your screen so you have full slideshow?
Yes, that is right. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. And show everyone your notes like I did.
Yeah. It's funny, it's just showing, just 1 second. This is happening where I can't quite, it's showing that little toolbar that doesn't let me get to the slideshow. Sorry.
So if you go down the bottom right, can you see that there's like
That would be better.
slide?
Yes.
That one. Next one over.
Oh, beautiful. I like those better because this other little Zoom thing was blocking it. So wonderful. Okay, thanks so much, Zoe, for saving the day. Wonderful. Okay, so yes, look, thanks for having us. And we are very happy to be presenting some of the findings and sort of experiences we had as part of our Safer and Stronger Communities pilot project, which I will go into a bit more detail in a minute. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I'm on Wurundjeri country, and I pay our respects to those elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that this land has never been ceded and will and always will be Aboriginal land. So just really briefly, just for those who are not familiar with Southeast Community Links, we are based in the southern region, as Katrina mentioned. We really work across City of Greater Dandenong, Casey, and a little bit Cardinia growing into that space. But we work a lot with local communities, providing support and services across a range of areas, like those areas mentioned there on the screen. So I am really glad that Avega's presentation had some really great diagrams and just different tools. It was really good because I feel like mine's lacking that a bit. So thank you, Avega, for explaining some of those things. And it's probably quite good because I've got a few more photos and stuff like that. So I'm glad your presentation came first because it did sort of set the scene for some of the stuff that I will be talking about. So yes, very, very good, timely. So with the Building Safer and Stronger Communities pilot, yes, that did go across. It was actually extended, so it went through to from 2018 into a little bit of 2021. And really that pilot was designed to test what works best to prevent violence within multicultural communities. So this was happening at the same time. There are a lot of prevention projects working with different communities, because we know violence occurs in all communities in society. But it was really specifically looking at some of the culturally diverse communities that we work with. It was a partnership with Multicultural Centre for Women's Health and Our Watch, and it was funded by what was then Department of Premier and Cabinet, now DFFH. The really critical part of this project, and really a big part of the work that we're still doing now in our prevention team, is working with community, and in particular really working in that true sense, like Avega mentioned, about co-designing projects. So this project, the foundations of it were very much having specific co-design groups that we were closely working with, building capacity of. And also, when I say building capacity of sort of the framework and the goals that we were trying to achieve with the family violence prevention, some of their understanding about the rules and laws and systems, and really having that dialogue and that exchange of understanding of what it's like in Australia compared to some of their experiences. So we decided, based on the needs from the community, we decided to work closely with the Afghan, Indian, and the African community, in which we formed specific separate co-design groups with each of those. That was because we had a lot of community interest. We had some established relationships within those communities, and yeah, that was a really strong sort of reason, because there were a lot of communities, you know, within this area, but we decided we had to narrow it down to a few. We also had a really important local strategic working group that did provide a lot of guidance, direction, and a great sounding board for some of the experiences and steps that we were taking as part of this project. With the team, in terms of the team, the SECL team that led this or worked alongside with this project, there was Hyatt, Evelyn, and myself. And what I would like to mention, that because of time, I won't be going into a lot of the details of this project, but we did complete a report in which you can find a lot of the evaluations and a broader sort of description of what our goals and aims and objectives were. Because it was a 2.5-year project, it was quite lengthy, but that project really was looking at an internal level within the organisation. So really putting the lens on us as an organisation, our policies, procedures, our systems, and how we are in terms of our efficiency, and even understanding of violence against women, of how we contribute or not to those sort of issues, and really looking at leadership within our organisation. So the other part of it was working with community and then developing some prevention programs that were tailored to those communities that we were working with. So, excuse me, with this project, this slide is probably I'm going to talk to the most. Really, when we think about intersectionality, co-design as a process, if in its true form, is having an intersectional approach to our work. So there are some really wonderful tools like Avega shared around looking at that ladder of participation and true inclusion. Vic Health also have some good tools that are helpful about co-design. But with co-design and the way that we approached or embedded that into our program, is that they really, our co-design members were involved from the very beginning to the end in projects. They were involved from designing to deciding about what's going to work for their community, through to even co-facilitating that. So, and co-facilitating happened most of the time. In a few cases, maybe there wasn't the confidence or comfort to do so. So they were alongside us, supporting us and as part of the group. But the co-design process was really important, because it really provided that foundation for talking about their experiences, talking about what is actually going to be digestible for the community in terms of how should we tailor these messages, what should we do, where should we do it, all of those sorts of questions the community was involved in. So we ended up, as part of this project, we ended up having a number of different activities within each of those co-design groups. So some of them suggested a women's leadership. One of the groups wanted to do some self-defense and have some workshops as part of that. We also did the Change the Story adaptation in 5 different community languages. That was a large project. And then we had a boys and men's soccer group. I think we had about 7 or 8 different projects across that period. And when I talk about projects, it wasn't just one-off. We recognize that prevention takes time. It needs to be over a period of time to really create that change, whether it's attitudinal or behavioral, probably takes even further, even longer. But with the co-design process, yes, I think that is really critical, that if you're going to be co-designing, that you really make time for all of that to be embedded in it. I might just mention also, in terms of deciding upon our co-design members, there was a clear expression of interest. So what's really important is that you really help the community understand, or those members, about what is the commitment and what's involved, because, you know, of course, co-design, you know, that might make sense to us, but not to others. So really talking about what that co-design process looks like, and then ensuring that they're definitely interested by completing expression of interest form and talking about their involvement. The other thing when we're co-designing projects and also wanting to work with an intersectional approach is having time for capacity building, for developing really genuine relationships, for sharing of stories, understanding all of those elements of that person and of their experiences is really important. So I talk about the genuine relationships and valuing their lived experiences. Really, you know, ensuring that all the members have a chance to share and they feel safe to share in those environments is really important too. And that sometimes does involve us having a conversation with certain members, maybe later or afterwards, about maybe if they're uncomfortable, or if they're not talking, or if someone's talking too much, having to sort of navigate that so that people feel equally able to share and to participate in those discussions about the prevention project and what are we actually going to be developing and doing with the community. Another really important element, you know, is the project funding. I'm a strong advocate of always making sure that the project funding allows for honorarium payments. I think it's incredibly unfair if I'm sitting there getting paid to be there, but yet I'm dragging these people out of their homes late at night on the weekends, that they're not recognised with some monetary payments. So always building that into the budgets and having that involved. Even I would have honorarium payments for example, when maybe it was Mama Rose or Fatima would spend time in their own time, maybe an hour or two, calling participants, reminding them of our event. I would say, you know, keep a record of that. I want to pay you for that time, those extra hours, because it just makes the project successful, and it makes them feel like they're being valued and they're really part of that project team. So it's a really important element. I mentioned about co-facilitating where possible. And that requires, you know, extra workshops and extra time to sort of talk about the content, make sure that those co-design members are comfortable and sort of understanding what was sort of the message that we've decided, or the content that we've decided to communicate. The importance of sharing a meal and being flexible with time. So you'll see later when I share some quotes, you know, this was so appreciated. Being patient, waiting for community members, and having that flexibility to sometimes go over an hour or so because they're enjoying a chat and talking about things. So I've talked about the hours and the weekends, meeting where they are. So if we really want to engage these community members and see the benefits and see the impact, we need to be making it convenient and creating that safe environment that they're familiar with. As we mentioned before, and I think it was spoken about before, reflective practice and evaluations, debrief, all of these things are really critical. With our programs, we did have pre and post surveys with our 4 or 5, or even we had a 10-week self-defense program, which was self-defense and then workshops. So we had these pre and post evaluations, which really provided rich insights into what worked, what didn't work, what could we improve on, what do they take away from that. And the reflective practice occurred after all of our meetings. We would have debriefs with the project team. We'd have follow-up conversations with those co-design members to check in about what they're thinking and how they're feeling about this prevention project. Just briefly, because I need to be aware of time, with our co-design membership, things to take into consideration, as we all know, is really looking and understanding about those people who are involved in our co-design group. But also this applies to our community as well. So what I noticed, what we had to sort of navigate sometimes, where sometimes there was maybe some cultural differences and tensions that might have surfaced across some of the engagement we had. But also it was about recognizing when we were bringing together key members for our different co-design groups, was sort of trying to make sure that there was a bit of a variety, like it was further represented with each community. So we would have sometimes, if we had people who were more maybe, for example, say we had 1 or 2 skilled migrants who were very academic, but then we also had a balance of some that were not skilled. They were humanitarian entrants. So really sort of making sure that we are having those diverse experiences represented, and also because they reach out to community members who are of sort of a broader cross section of community as well. So I love this photo. So this is an example from our African co-design group, where Mama Rose started talking about I think we were talking about culture and tradition. And she was really just talking about, well, I want to tell you a story about how my day used to start in Africa, what it was like for me in Sudan, starting and before the man rises from the bed, she would say. So she went through and talked all about, the jobs that she did, the caring for children, the cooking, the cleaning, and so forth. But it really gave that rich insight into her experience and their experiences, and helped shape our understanding of how we need to tackle some of this. I don't know if tackle is the best word, but how we need to approach some of this work that we're doing with the community. These are some quotes and some voices from the community. So, really, really important comments that often were shared either in voice through the community face-to-face conversations, or it could have been through the evaluations. And this really helped us understand about adaptation, sometimes how we need to adapt our content, how we need to look at other strategies, okay, with the police, for example, or even talk to them about the police in Australia and about our systems and so forth, not discounting their experiences, but just seeking to understand and break down some of maybe those negative stereotypes or misperceptions. The last comment really talks about, about how they really appreciated our time that we would spend in allowing them to socialize after the events, and what that meant to them as well. It gained greater trust and respect, and just, really created a lovely environment with our co-design groups. This is just another point on the way that we had the local strategic working group and our co-design groups. Sometimes we bring all of our co-design groups together for training, for capacity building, and that it was really important. We actually heard it helped them understand that this is a united sort of front. We're all working together on preventing family violence in our communities. As much as we said that at the very beginning, of course, we said we're not just working with, the Afghan community or the African community. This work is being carried out across the whole of Victoria and Australia, and it's really important work, and we're not suggesting that you have more, that you have higher rates. And so that was, of course, communicated, but when they saw everyone, when we brought everyone together, some 26 or 7 participants, and some of our local strategic working group members, which were more of services, it allowed for a really rich exchange and shared insights and just greater understanding. So that was a sort of an incidental learning as well. We were thinking about saving time, to be honest, and not running all these separate training sessions, but it worked really well. So that was important. So this is just some further insights from the community. And I might just point out the second quote about what I really felt, and a big tip. I'm not too sure if others have experienced this, but when we talk about culture and how culture can change and does change, there might be resistance, but it can slowly change. It really resonated with them when we could give examples of how gender equality is improving or taking shape or changing in countries that were similar to theirs or close to theirs. So it wasn't just an Australian thing that we're sort of talking about here, that it's global. And I felt like that was reassuring and motivating and inspiring for our community participants. So this was one of our co-design, this is one of our prevention projects with the Somalian and Eritrean boys and men. It ran for 5 Saturdays or Sundays, I forget now, but it was a great project. And I really emphasized the co-facilitating with boys and men. There were 3 females on our prevention team. So having Ahmed, the gentleman on the right, really involved was so critical. And we actually noticed that some learnings from that was he wasn't so involved in the earlier workshops, but when he did get more involved, it just made such a difference rather than us as females talking to this group of males. So, you know, and I think it was more of a confidence thing and just building confidence for him to be involved in some of that delivery of the content after they played soccer. But yeah, it's really important, of course, to have boys involved in, boys or men involved in prevention programs delivered to men. So that's great. I would like to introduce to you, I'm moving along very fast here, but we're our co-design members now. We're our co-design members. We're in contact with most of them. A few of them, well, a couple of them we're actually working on a new prevention project with. But we definitely linked them in with different opportunities, whether it was capacity building opportunities, whether it was research projects. But what was great to learn is that a few of them, especially a few of the females, were able to find jobs, employment in this area. And I think it was as a result of being involved in our family violence prevention project. I know that seems like taking a lot of credit, but it was something we were able to provide references, and it was something that they hadn't been so involved in before. So being able to have that on their resume and talk about their passion to learn more really was helpful. I would like to introduce to you Fatima. Fatima was one of our Afghan co-design group members, and I believe she might be happy to share a few words. She might want to talk about our Change the Story video or share any comments relating to what I have mentioned. Fatima, are you there?
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, hi, everyone else. Thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure for me to see everyone from different organizations, and I share my experience with the community family violence prevention and as being community members. It was such a great experience for me to be part of the project. I learned a lot of they provide lots of trainings and the experience, the knowledge that we as a community members really needed. As I see a lot of issues and high demand in the community, especially in Afghans, or maybe for every communities. Me as part of the Afghan community, as a growing new future generations of this community, there's a high risk, and we as being like a bit, being part of these projects really help us be part of that preventions of the family violence that are occurring in the community. And we are here to how we can bring those changes and into the community. And also the good thing is for the Southeast Community Links that they choose the community members themselves to identify the family violence issues, because it might be different from different communities that what leads to family violence, and how they can themselves design something that prevent that violence for that community, because they are from within the community, they know what's the issue, and then how they can come up with a plan to start with the prevention. So it was really good project, and it was I was really happy to be part of this prevention, as I started to learn about especially about be clear with my own career. Now I'm working in this field with family violence. So it was a really good experience, and also helped me to identify different kinds of violence that happenings in the communities around people around me, and how the communities react to family violence when we talk about them within the community. So I really see a high needs of preventions in the community, and doing these kinds of projects, really giving some tools, some kinds of knowledge, especially to the new generations, how they can help, how they can better strengthen their family structures and the family. We can't change my dad's or the older generation's view of what they think of. We can't change them, but we can give them awareness, and also we can educate the new generations, the younger generations, that they can't do this violence. They have to be respectful of the women and in different aspects. So yeah, it was really good to be part of this project, and the time, the knowledge that they provided for us as being part of the community, the self-defense classes, it was such a great tool for us as the new generations coming to Australia. It was such a great tool for us to understand, to learn how we can use those tools within the community, within the families. And it really built my confidence, talking about family violence in the families, how it happens, what we can do about it, and how the new generations, how my parents, they can do about the family violence preventions in the families. It starts from the family. If the families start educating themselves and people around them, something is going to happen. So yeah, it was really good, as it was really helped me and other community members to learn a lot from this project. And I'm looking forward for a lot more of these kinds of projects for the communities. Yes, thank you so much for having me, Michelle, and everyone else.
Thanks, Fatima. That's really wonderful. And I was just trying to move to the next screen because I wanted to show or just mention that we were really fortunate with this project. I mean, as much as we were in lockdown for a lot of the time, with the self-defense workshop that Fatima was speaking of, we managed to extend that and run that, I think, across, it was originally going to be 8 Saturdays, but then they wanted more, so we had 12 or 10 or something. So we managed to do that just before a lot of those lockdowns happened. But then the story videos, Fatima, you might remember, we were on Zoom a lot. And what was wonderful about those Change the Story videos was that Fatima contributed to writing the scripts, rewriting those scripts to be more appropriate for what they're seeing and experiencing in their community. So I didn't help with the script writing. It was really like them saying, well, this is what annoys me. This is what I really want to talk about and see a change in. So that was really wonderful. And then even deciding upon what the dress and the clothes and the visual images of those people, that was decided by and supported by the co-design group. We did have someone trying to choose different little figurines and get their feedback and stuff, but it was really great. And Fatima was just such a wonderful member, tuning in at all different hours to try and get this finished in time, which was a huge success. So thank you, Fatima, for sharing your insights and your experiences, and I'm just so pleased and happy that you've secured this job in family violence prevention, and you're working in that space today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle and Fatima, for your presentation and contribution to the session today. It's just so wonderful to hear from you and the project that the valuable project that Southeast Community Links has done. As you've mentioned, there is a report that shows all the recommendations, so we'll make sure that we share that with everyone here today as well. So what we would like to do is, in the last 15, move to a panel discussion for the next little bit of time, and this is your chance to really pitch any burning questions towards the panel. We have our two presenters, Michelle and Vega, joining, along with Kelly Sigornos, who is part of the health promotion team at WHISE and works within our multicultural community engagement team. Kelly works in partnership with communities to establish strong positive relationships with migrant refugee women, designing and delivering appropriate health and primary prevention support for women's health across the Southern Metropolitan region. We also have Catherine Kosassi, who is the Manager of Inclusion and Equity, Family Safety Victoria. Catherine is leading work on the Everybody Matters Inclusion and Equity Statement and Blueprint, which promotes an intersectional approach to understanding and responding to family violence across government-funded services. FSV are currently in the process of updating the Intersectionality Capacity Building Handbook, and a key resource for workforces that intersect with family violence to build intersectionality into practice. So this handbook, tools and tip sheets guide an organisational approach to understanding intersectionality and the role of all parts of an organisation to embed intersectional practice. So Kelly, I would like to just direct the first question to you, and then I might open it up to the panel. But I know our multicultural community engagement team has done a lot of intersectional practice work in prevention of violence with CALD communities. And what would be the biggest learning and any tips that you would recommend to those engaging in this work?
Yes, thank you, Kat. It's been great being here this morning and hearing everyone. Following on from yourself, Kat, Vega, Zoe, Michelle, and Fatima, who've already contributed and shared from my experience as part of the multicultural community engagement team. I've had the opportunity to work with a group of South Sudanese women through CMY, and some of the key issues, I think things that have already been said here, but the importance of working with the CALD community is always allowing the open dialogue. In terms of the intersectional lens, what we do know, as it is speaks for itself as intersectional, is that it's, we're talking about multiple layers, and it's important to keep that in mind and to be able to take time to unfold with our communities their needs, their lived experience, because they are the experts in their lives, and to understand where they're coming from. Often, and as a health education officer, we'll go in with a program. But what I've learned, and from my experience, is that we need to be flexible, open to adjusting terminology, language, behaviour, being okay with going back to the design, and as I think Michelle spoke to, co-design. So even though we have a direction and a strategy and everything else, we're not there to fix, we're there to learn from our CALD communities as well. And it's very important to hold in mind where they're coming from, allowing them to name their challenges, in their language, to be curious and to listen. And I think to come at these opportunities with compassion, not sympathy, not pity. That compassion is being able to put ourselves in their shoes, to look as them, not to look at them, you know, as if there's some, you know, as if our community, oh, you know, I'm from a COG community as well, but it's not like someone looking at me, you know, oh, isn't she interesting? But it's actually someone trying to look through my eyes, through my lens, look in my shoes, you know, what has been the lived experience, and really wanting to understand. And the reflexivity of that is then me thinking about it, and everybody thinking about what does that mean, considering what I know and what I'm doing, and actually being able then to go back and be flexible again and adjust accordingly. So that would be my input in regards to applying an intersectional lens. Is really, it's an unfurling. It's not like being a bull in the China store. It really takes time, and that is, and you know, everyone here has spoken about that, and Michelle spoke about that at length as well, and Avega as well, and Fatima in her own experience.
Thanks, Kelly. That's really lovely, and thanks for sharing your experience with the work that you've done with CMY. Catherine, I would like to throw to you, if I can, just to give a bit of an update on where things are at in terms of Family Safety Victoria, and just any thoughts that you'd like to add to the discussion today.
Thank you, and thanks so much for inviting us to come along today. I know Hannah, my colleague, Hannah Casey, has been really enjoying the presentation so far today. I've only been able to join more recently, but thanks for having me. Hannah and I are from the Inclusion and Equity team at Family Safety Victoria, and now you've met us and know who we are. Do feel free to contact us at any time if you want to talk about our work, because we are responsible for the implementation of Everybody Matters. And I think, Katrina, you mentioned it earlier and certainly spoke to it in our introduction. One of our key projects that's most relevant to today that we are implementing as part of our work, and all our work in this space really reflects the findings from the Royal Commission that you know, a call for services to be more inclusive, reduce barriers to access, and also respond to specific needs of diverse communities. We do lots of things in the team to help make that happen, including leading the implementation of Everybody Matters. But the intersectionality capability building project is a really key initiative or piece of work that we're doing to support that. And when it's released, and I'll talk about that in a tick, we're really hoping it will be a practical resource that will support organisations in the family violence and sexual assault, you know, system to be able to implement intersectionality in practice within their organisation, and give them really helpful tools to do that. And the way that it's designed means that there are resources that can, you know, support the whole organisation to engage in these conversations. There's everything from resources to support boards and senior leadership to take a lead on implementing an intersectional approach, down to tools that individual workers can use to do critical self-reflection around having safe and respectful conversations, use inclusive language. And, you know, in the middle, there's hopefully really supportive resources that can help managers, team leaders to also build that into their team's work. And so what happened recently is we had 4 organisations across the space in the state, and we chose really different ones to trial it, including Women's Health in the North, one of them, to trial using it, and they've given us feedback. So we're kind of engaging with that feedback now and hope to release it shortly. The short version, for those who are champing at the bit, is we have an opportunity, which is going to take a bit longer, to build it into a more interactive, not technological, web-based, where people will be able to dive in and engage with the materials relevant to them, depending on where they sit in an organisation or what they're trying to tackle. But in the short term, we're going to release a lo-fi version that's more, you know, PDF of the material that's available for you all to use. Yeah, so really excited about it and looking forward to getting it out there, and for organisations to kind of be able to build on what we've already you know, put the work into developing, rather than having to start from scratch, which when we're all slim on time is really helpful. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and really value your attendance on the panel today. Look, I'd like to throw it out to you, the attendees here today. If you have any questions that you would like to pose specifically to Avega or Michelle about their projects, or Kelly, or even Catherine. So I can see that Fiona has put a question in the chat here. What are your thoughts on how we can encourage leaders, councils, / state to plan infrastructure and services to focus on the 20% rather than the 80%? So I think what she's meaning there is flipping it and how we can get those leaders. And I think probably, Catherine, what you've spoken to, the resources that you've got that will actually address particular areas within organisations, and like you said, have some specific things for leaders to build their capacity in that space will be really helpful. But if anyone's got any other thoughts, please let us know. Anyone on the panel want to speak more to that? Avega?
Yes, that's a really, really good question, Fiona. Just talking a little bit about, you know, experience with the Margins to the Mainstream project. I think one of the issues is that, you know, often disability is seen as a sector or an area of work where gender doesn't really come into it. So, you know, we can look at a lot of documents which have statistics on people with disability, and, you know, surprise, surprise, it's still the case that there's not data that's disaggregated by gender, so, or not consistently disaggregated by gender. So I think also some of the assumptions we have about disability influence, you know, what organisations are focusing on too. So I know, you know, we just have to look at representation of disability. If we see any images or pictures of people with disability, the shorthand is typically someone in a wheelchair. So that's really important to think about the accessibility needs of people in wheelchairs, but, you know, they're not the only people with disabilities, and many people have invisible disabilities. So I think that issue of unpacking, you know, and understanding the nuance about who are the people with disability, and looking at, you know, the interplay of gender and disability, and thinking about what is needed to really respond to women with disability would be really an important thing. You know, disability can be acquired. Disability can be acquired as a result of domestic and family violence. There's a lot of stigma about disclosing disability too. So I think, you know, in terms of gender impact assessments, there's a lot that councils could think about in terms of how they actually meaningfully consult with women with disabilities when they're looking at doing some sort of gender impact assessment. And that means going beyond, you know, the usual surveys or whoever happens to respond, but to go out and seek conscious attention to getting the perspectives of particular people, you know, and using that intersectional identities, looking at women with disabilities, for example.
Yeah, thanks, Avega. Agree with what you've said there. Really important. It's not often just physical disability, it is that invisible disability as well. And particularly important, women who have had lived experience and have disabilities as a result of family violence are very important to engage in this conversation. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone has a burning question that they would like to ask, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I have put, oh, actually, that does remind me, there was some conversation in the chat. And I see that Virginia Richardson has provided a link to the Universal Design Funding Round, which will be really useful, I think, which is the new State Universal Design Policy. And that will, particularly for councils, be a really useful document for them to look at and see how they can take advantage of that. So given that we've got 1 minute left and I want to make sure we let everyone go on time, what I would like to do today is just thank you all for your attendance, and we really appreciate you being here today. We would also like to extend a huge thank you to our presenters today. So Vega, Michelle and Fatima, Kelly and Catherine on our panel today. And we would ask you if you can please assist us in our evaluation by completing the post-evaluation survey, which we will send out. We'll also have recorded this session, so we'll be providing a recording to everyone who's attended as well. So thank you so much, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.